So we're here today with Councillor Connor Macaulay to talk about the Forest Gate clock. It happens that there's a lot of interest around the clock, and I overheard that you were involved in saving it in some way. And then about a month ago I was walking past the clock and saw a technician doing the annual maintenance on it, and he let me take some photographs of the inside of the clock and told me about the maintenance of it, and I just thought I'd like to take those photos, your story, and put it all together. So I'm just going to ask that broad question of, can you give your history?
Well, I came to Newham back in 1974. My first address was at number 1 Hampton Road. It was a house full of bedsits, which of course is just around the corner. And the Fox and Hounds pub beside the clock became effectively my living room. And there were a group of us who lived in bedsits in and around Forest Gate at the time, and we used to come and hang out at the Fox and Hounds. Of course, the clock's sitting on opposite. And at some point in the later 70s, one of their many experiments started to do with that piece of sort of public realm around the clock. They put in flower beds, quite extensive flower beds that ran quite around a sort of slightly different configured traffic island there. And they planted roses, and they looked quite nice for about a fortnight, until the roses started disappearing. I think people were just nicking the plants. And in the end, during the summer, when the sun was out and we were sitting outside the pub rather than sitting inside the pub, we'd been sitting on the wall of the flower beds, never a pound or whatever, and in the end the flower beds became large ashtrays. And litter accumulated and so on. So it's one of the many experiments I started to do around the clock and the trough that never really came off and never worked properly. And so sometime later in the early 1982, I got elected to the council. And I was the councillor for what was then Forest Gate Ward, roughly the same as Forest Gate Ward North as it is now, which included the clock and the Fox and Hounds and down Forest Lane as far as the hospital, maternity hospital, and up as far as Cape Road. And at some point later on, I was sitting in about the mid-80s, I finished up with the Council's Highways and Works Committee, which, as the name implies, dealt with the highways and the streets and street maintenance and public realm areas around the borough. And I regularly nagged them to keep the clock working, because it would stop, and for a few months, weeks, months, sometimes even years, the clock would not be working. There was a technician's job was to repair it. I'm surprised you mentioned the annual maintenance. I wasn't aware they did an annual maintenance of the clock, but there you go. And so I used to regularly annoy them, why isn't the clock working? When are you going to fix the clock? And I was a councillor for 20 years in Forest Gate Ward, so this is a regular occurrence. And at some point when they were looking at yet another junction improvement and what to do with the public realm, they came up with the idea of reconfiguring the junction completely and removing the trough and the clock. And the highways guys thought this was a really great idea. And I think the engineer was either George Eiley or Edwin. Anyway, I can't quite remember the name of the Edwin Doyle, the director of the department at the time. And they thought it was a really cool idea that it would ease the traffic movements and they could rationalise the public realm in the area. I don't think they had any idea as to the significance of the clock or the trough. And in fact, at the time, more people were interested in the trough than the clock in terms of as a sort of link to Newham's past. It's where horses used to drink the water when they were hauling stuff out of Stratford. And so the trough is probably the thing that brought out the support to save it, not so much the clock, because nobody trusted the clock. It was only ever right twice a day because it was usually stopped. And nonetheless, in the end, as it happens, later on I became deputy leader of the council as well, so I suppose that carried a bit more clout. So I was able to say to them, no, you're not shifting that, and it stays. And they listened. And so they didn't remove the clock or the trough, but they did remove the flower beds and so on that surround it, and replaced it subsequently under a subsequent funding regime with the odd-shaped pieces of the granite that are there at the moment.
And what year was this?
Well, this has gone over a number of years, but it's from, I joined the Highways Works in '85, and I think the threat came around in '88.
Okay.
And it was a real one, and they often struggle as to what to do with that junction, as they still do today. But no, the idea was, if we remove the clock and the trough, it stops people whinging about the clock not working, and it makes it possible to have an easier junction, as they thought, for traffic movements. Because in those days, the Highways Department was literally all about moving cars around Newham and not about anything else. Didn't do cycle lanes, didn't do footpaths. It was really all about moving cars through Newham, and that's all they were really interested in. And that's largely, they followed the money, because government transport money was all about helping cars travel. Right. That's what they did. And that was the principal role of the department. All they did otherwise was clutter the public realm up with pointless bollards or fencing. And if you remember, at one stage Newham had lots of fencing, particularly around the station at Forest Gate, but also around the junction at Rumford Road.
I've seen photographs of the clock where it had a railing almost around the entire triangle there.
They were very fond of fencing everything in, and fencing in footpaths and so on. And largely because they got lots of capital money to do road improvements and public rail improvements. And it was really a means of keeping them occupied and employed. And what they did in the end with Newham was, we usually had very badly maintained fencing, because after a while the paintwork would wear off, or cars would scrape them or knock them over. So revenue money to maintain them wasn't available, but capital money that you borrowed, was available, so they would just buy more. And so it wasn't until much more recently that we've had to remove as much as we could of the metal fencing and the other sort of detritus that was on the street, blocking everything and making just clutter. And I suppose one of the advantages of that, it actually opened up access to the clock again and to the trough, but left them there, and that's good. And the improvements that will be taking place around the Forest Gate Station public realm as part of the Crossrail project should help maintain it again, and just make it more of a feature that people can enjoy. And that'll be good.
Great, thank you.